Hello everyone, TheMrTrails here. Today, let's talk about the legendary Radiant Escalation amps. Real quick though, I should be on Twitch today doing a final round of Unseen Crown help, as well as more Hunt Pass and Twitch Bundle giveaways. In a recent video, I pointed out the content release schedule for Dauntless from spring into summer. Now we basically got 4 or 5 patches, roughly 2 months of time that were basically just dedicated to Radiant Escalation stuff. But this was with Radiant Escalation probably being the least well-received escalation of all of them. And this is simply just because of the release days. Many people would have wanted the Radiant Escalation to come out about a year earlier. They instead chose to release the Paradox Breaks and the Carnivore on its own. And they said they did this because they were feeling locked into the escalation style and they wanted to change things up, as well as getting to work on other things within a reasonable amount of time. Looking back on this, following the release of Carnivore, they did actually do quite a few interesting things in just a few months' time. We had Omni Cells, cell recategorization, new variant behemoths like Thunderdeep Drask and Bloodshot Shroud, and then some brand new behemoths like Savit and Phalanx. And I guess if Radiant Escalation was as intricate as it was, releasing in 2021 instead of 2022, then there would have been a bit of a longer delay in getting some of these awesome features that we ended up getting. But perhaps they could have been able to do all of that work a little bit faster, seeing as there were probably more members on the dev team for Dauntless in 2021 than there was in 2022 when they finished it up. But going back to what ended up happening, in 1.10.3 we got the Radiant Escalation release, and then 1.10.4 through 1.11.1 were basically all patches that only really released the Radiant Escal legendaries. And for these to have taken up roughly a month and a half or so of development time, they're honestly a little bit disappointing when you think about the game as a whole. And this 1.5 months of development time basically just turned into a 1% chance to get a brand new amp in one specific escalation, with the only other major releases in that time being Heroic Radiant Escalation, which is another thing you're really not going to be able to interact with much. You'll have 1 out of 6 weeks where you will be able to even play the game mode. And the other major release here was Lightbound Boreas, which was basically just playing catch up because it should have came out with Radiant Escalation, but it had to be delayed. And I say all of this to give my take that the Radiant Escal legendaries shouldn't be locked to Radiant Esca, or maybe shouldn't be legendary. Now, why do I think it shouldn't be in only Radiant Escalation? Well, outside of escalation patrols for weekly challenges or something, I really haven't played Radiant Escalation at all since the 1.11.1 patch. While it's a decently fast escalation, it's not the most optimal in terms of getting your levels on, your reforges, and the Carnivore's fights are pretty inconsistent, part of that being that you really have a hard time staggering the thing because of hitboxes. The head has a decently small hitbox to begin with, but then you add in that Carnivore basically floats around the entire time, keeping its head out of reach for a good portion of that, and I would think plenty of people just don't like fighting Carnivore as much in comparison to the other escalation bosses. Probably one of the better behemoths in terms of game difficulty and design perspective, but its fight is largely unscriptable, and it's really hard to actually replicate a script on it, because staggering it is somewhat difficult, but also interrupting it is somewhat difficult. Even though it does plenty of interrupts, it's just really hard to actually hit them. But if you don't enjoy Radiant Escalation for one reason or another, or just have less incentive to play it than other escalations, then you're basically missing out on several months of game design. In my opinion, the Legendary Lantern amps are actually a very solid addition to the game. However, they just don't appear frequently enough in the escalation that they are in, as well as just not being in other escalations. While one of the main reasons for them being legendary is to have that wow factor of, hey, I got the legendary amp, that wow factor would still be there if they were available in the other escalations. And perhaps we could have a discussion on how to make that sort of thing happen. A quick fix would just be to add all of these legendary amps into all of the escalations. Because only one of these is even going to be possible to get on each run, you're really not diluting the amp pool too much by doing this either. That way these things that are fun are not limited to only one escalation. But there's also a more complex option available, and that's to rework the escalation skill trees. And it would make sense to take a look at these again, considering we have all 6 of the elemental escalations. And plenty of you guys talk about this, but no, they are probably never doing neutral escalation. But with all of the escalations having been released, one final reworking of the talent tree system would make a bit of sense. As for what would get done to those talent trees, there would be a million different options for that, but I do kind of like the idea of some of the nodes enhancing the experience with some of the amps we already have, also in the other escalations. For example, say you were able to unlock the Radiant Escalation legendary amps on a skill tree for Blaze Escalation. But in addition to unlocking them, say you were able to reduce the rarity of them from legendary to to epic and epic to rare. Or instead of decreasing the rarity, maybe increase their power for when you do get them. To do that sort of thing, you would probably have to make a more Slayer's Path oriented skill tree, with that one main trunk of abilities and then branching off from there. The main trunk would likely be those generic passives, like the damage resistance, the crit chance, and stuff like that. And then you basically still do the similar thing that you are doing right now. The lower branches have the lower rarity stuff, and then the higher branches have higher rarity stuff, or are infecting what amps you can see in the escalation. But whatever would end up being the case, it would be nice to have the Radiant Esca legendaries appear in other escalation. But that's going to be about it for this one, guys. Thank you for watching. Consider dropping a like for me if you enjoyed, and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. And I have been Trevor. I go by the Mr. Trails, and I will catch you guys next time.